I wanted to talk to you guys personally about a couple of things that have been on my mind. First of all, I'm going to tell you, those who are watching this on YouTube, for the next 2 weeks, you're going to see me with my glasses on and off as needed, because I'm having LASIK in 2 weeks. 2 weeks from, less than 2 weeks. I'm having LASIK, and you can't wear your glasses for 2 weeks before. They need your corneas to be like not manipulated by contact lenses. So I'm very excited to be getting LASIK, and there's a lot of pressure on the doctor, because if he screws it up, of course, you're all going to know. But letting you know that. Number two, I just got back from vacation, and I wanted to talk to you guys about something that happened on vacation, because it was big in my own world, and I just didn't feel like I could just resume the show without talking about it. So you may have noticed, not last week. Last week we did the RFK Jr. interview on Monday and Tuesday, and then we did sort of a wellness week special for you guys the following 3 days on sleep, on exercise, on time management. All well worth your time, by the way. But the prior week, we were live the first 3 days from Montana, and then there were a lot of people noticing that we weren't on the air Thursday and Friday and wondering why that was. And there was a very good reason. We had planned on doing the show. However, something happened to my little guy, my Thatcher, my 8-year-old, while we were skiing. And thank God he's okay. So I'll just start with the lead. But it was just such a crazy experience. We were skiing in Montana, and he's a good skier. He's been skiing since he was really, really little. And he was on an advanced run and did the run just fine, skied it just fine, but was inspired by this cave-like structure that was on the run to check it out. And he was with his instructor. And it's something I guess a lot of people go to, and they sort of hike up to get into this little cave and take a break on this run. And he did that. And he didn't even have his skis on. He had on his ski boots. Again, he's only 8. And it was the end of the day, and he was tired, and he apparently didn't have the strength to make the climb that's necessary to get into this little cave. And he fell. Now, meantime, I skied a little bit that morning, and then I was going I did the show. I did a little skiing, and then I was going for a massage. And I get a call from Doug saying, Thatcher's hurt, and he's fine. He's fine, but he's hurt, and he's got to go to the hospital to be checked out. So I confess, my first instinct was, crap, I'm going to miss my massage. I'm sure he's fine. Have you ever been there? It's like, oh, I'm sure he's fine, but we'll go get him checked out. I get in the ambulance, and there's Thatcher, and he seems okay. He's speaking. He says he fell 10 feet and landed on some rocks while hiking up this part of the mountain. But he's got an IV in him. And I'm like, why does he have an IV in him? And the ambulance, the emergency technician said that's protocol when there might be an internal injury. I'm like, well, why do you think there's an internal injury? She said, well, given the way he fell on rocks, and the pain that he'd been complaining of, it's a possibility. So this is protocol. So she said, do you want me to give him some fentanyl? So I'm like, no, he seems fine. He's in some pain, but no, I don't want my 8-year-old to have fentanyl right now. Let's wait until we get to the hospital. And I understand, again, she was following protocol, but it's a jarring thing to be asked that question. So we get to the hospital, and they said they needed to run some tests. First, they needed to do an ultrasound on his belly to see what they'd find. And they did that. Dr. Rodriguez did that, and we saw it. And he said, what we're looking for is fluid that doesn't belong in between the organs, which would be, he said the only fluid that they're concerned about is blood. So they don't want any internal bleeding. So he did the scan, and Thatcher said, I'm going to be fine. I don't think I have that. And he was so brave throughout. So nothing came up. Okay, great. Then they said, we have to do one more scan. And that's a CT scan. And you've heard about CT scans, right? Although I've never had one. I didn't actually know what it was. What it is an enormous X-ray that has, unfortunately, a lot of radiation, but it's great at seeing what an ultrasound can't see. So my little guy, we put some pictures on the board. I don't show them publicly because I'm pretty much the opposite of Kim Kardashian when it comes to my children. So we put some pictures up where you can't really see Thatcher's face, but he's going into the CT scan here, and lo and behold, there was internal bleeding. And he had lacerated, had 2 severe lacerations to his spleen and a third, the size of which they weren't able to determine. So 3 tears of his spleen, which is only, I guess it's about 5 inches. I'm not totally sure on the size of a little boy's spleen, but he dinged it up pretty good. And he was bleeding internally, and they said, you need to go to a more serious hospital right now. And they said, ASAP, you got to get into the ambulance. So we were like, oh my God, what? So, it's like an hour earlier, I'd been like, oh, I'm going to miss my massage, and, Thatcher's going to be fine. We're going to go home. And now suddenly it's ASAP into the ambulance to the more severe hospital. So we get back into the ambulance, and he's still fine, in terms of he's speaking, and, we're kind of cracking jokes. I'm taking video of it just to sort of, we were laughing the whole time. This is going to be a great show and tell. He still has, they call it share. It's going to be a great share. And we get to the hospital, and they whisk him into the ICU. And now I'm like, why are we going into the I mean, I know absolutely nothing about medicine, right? So it's like, why are we going into the ICU? And no one's making it totally clear to me why we're going to the ICU until this lovely nurse who became sort of the heroine of our stay, Alyssa, ultimately sat me down and explained to me that these are severe tears of his spleen, and that there's a very good chance he's going to lose his spleen, and the doctor's going to explain more. So now I called Doug. He's with our other 2 children. And, he and I had been talking, but, now we understand there's internal bleeding. This could be an operation situation in a hospital we don't know, in a town we don't know, in the middle of Montana. And we don't have our doctor there. We don't know what to do exactly. But the surgeon did come in and said, we hope he's not going to lose his spleen, but if the bleeding continues, we're going to take the spleen. And, I only know what I know from ER. Yeah, okay, that's not bad. You lose the spleen. I said, Thatcher, of all the organs you could have injured, that's the best one to have to lose. And the doctor said, well, the gallbladder's better. That was the doctor at the first hospital. So I wasn't that worried. But then we started talking to our doctors back on the East Coast, who we've known a long time, friends of the family, peds specialists, and so on. And pretty much to a person, they said, don't lose the spleen. That it's almost never necessary in a young child to take the spleen in today's day and age, and that there are other measures you can do. Like if you can get an interventional radiologist, you can potentially save the spleen without taking it. And taking the spleen itself is a major operation, which our surgeon told us as well. So, right. So now you're there like, oh God, okay. So we don't really want him to operate. It was a level 3 trauma center, not a level 1, and they didn't have a peds specialist. So that was another thing, which wasn't ideal. And some of the folks advising us were saying you should seriously look into medevacing him to a level 1 trauma center with this pediatric specialist, or at least an interventional radiologist. And that's, I guess, what you need to sort of repair the spleen as opposed to take the spleen. So the closest places that you could find that were Seattle, I think, and Salt Lake City, Utah. But that's a lengthy plane ride. And our surgeon was saying, don't move him. Like the number one thing you don't want to do right now is move him. He needs to be in the ICU. He needs to be in the hospital bed. And he is not allowed to even get up to go to the bathroom. He cannot leave the bed. So as a parent, like, what do you do, right? Like, what do you do? Because the bleeding's not stopping. We don't want him to lose the spleen. If there's any way of repairing it, we'd like to do that. But it's not safe to move him. We're looking into the medevac flights, none of which can come immediately anyway. Apparently they don't work the way they do in the movies, where it's like instantaneously you're gone. It takes a long time to arrange. And that's if you can get a bed on the receiving end, and if you can find the right person on the receiving end. And in the meantime, we look at our surgeon, and our surgeon said to me, he is not cleared for travel. Like, really felt strongly we should not be putting him on a flight. So the long and the short of it was, they found an interventional radiologist who was not a peds specialist, but who had done some work on children. And they said, if things go south, this person's here. there was a funny moment that you guys might appreciate knowing me, as none of these people did, where I was just as calm as I am speaking to you now. I mean, if I have one, sort of natural benefit to my normal personality, I'm not a panicker. I'm not an anxious person. I always joke that I'm like Jeb Bush, low energy, if anything, which has come back to help me more than haunt me in my life. It takes a lot to get me like anxious about stuff. And I was talking to the doctor and I was saying, what should we do? And what are the options? And blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you need to not panic. You need to not panic. And I was not panicking. And, I laughed. Like, those who know me, those who know anything about me know that I can take an enormous shitstorm in my life without panicking. Once again, I swore, it's still Lent. Lord forgive me. So I wasn't panicking, but I was just saying to Abby, feeling the water start to rise. You know what I mean? I could feel as the news kept coming in that the bleeding was ongoing, and I'm talking to Doug and we're trying to figure out what to do. And there's not a clear course. There's not a clear right course. I could feel the water rising. I sat down, I took a couple of deep breaths and just reminded myself that I had to be the parent, that he was depending on me and Doug, and like we had to make a decision, and this was no time to lose this natural skill that has served me so well. And I was fine. We decided to stay at the hospital. We were in Bozeman, Montana. And I can't say enough about the people there. They were wonderful. The nurses, the doctor, the PAs, everyone just treated us all so well and was so good in their communications with us and their treatment of my son. So we decided to stay. I was there overnight, every night. Doug was too. We switched on and off a couple of nights, in part because of you guys. Because while all this was going on, we were finishing up the RFK interview, which we had taped a few days earlier. And we wanted it to be amazing. We wanted it to be as close to perfect as it could be. And we wanted to achieve the impossible. And we did, which was we managed to air a 4-hour interview with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and have it live on all platforms with no censorship. And it stayed monetized everywhere, which was less important, but it is a feat. And he was happy with it, and our audience loved it. Who's ever done that before, right? Everyone's always getting deplatformed. You put somebody like RFK Jr. on, which is total nonsense because he was riveting and great. But we did it. And so I was coming back to our cabin where we ski and doing the sort of, ins and outs, as we call them, to that 4-hour show, which we split up over last Monday, Tuesday. And I have to say here a word on my amazing team and on the importance of colleagues and friends you can trust. Because there was a lot of fact checking that went into the RFK interview, as you know. And by the way, for what it's worth, he checked out on virtually everything he said, right? So he's not some disinformation machine, as people would have you believe. There were a couple things that we wanted to make sure the record was clear on, or make sure we offered perspective on. But it required a lot of work on our part, and my team just completely took the ball and ran, knowing that I was at the hospital, I was dealing with Thatcher, Doug too. And so when I got back to the place where Sirius had rented me this camera and so on, God bless Sirius too, they aired this thing without giving us any problem. They were nothing but supportive. I could just sit in the chair and do the ins and outs and get back to the hospital. And I think the end product was excellent. I just thought I was really proud of the interview. I hope if you haven't listened to it that you do. And I hope you enjoy it too. Part 1 is all about vaccines and so on, Fauci. And the second part has got some of that and then a lot about his personal history. Fascinating stuff. So my team, I'm very proud of them and very grateful to them. On the 3rd day of the hospital stay, things went in the wrong direction. And Thatcher's vitals were not doing what we wanted them to do. His blood pressure was falling and his heart rate, his pulse was rising. And the doctor said we might have to send him back in for another CT scan to see if the bleeding had stopped. That's the thing. It's not an arm that's bleeding. It's not like a head even. You can't see it. And he was in pain. We really didn't want to do it. It's a lot of radiation. And if you have to get it done, you got to get it done. But if you can avoid it, boy, it'd be better too. And so the doctor said, let's wait a bit before we do that and then we'll see. And thankfully things took a turn for the better then. And we managed to make it through the 5 days. The kid did not leave that bed for 5 days, which led to some very awkward and funny exchanges when it was time to use the facilities, which he wasn't allowed to do for me, Doug, and Thatcher. But who cares, right? You're not even thinking about that stuff. You're just thinking about your babe, how much you love him, how you pray everything's going to be okay. And, we kept laughing a lot. We got his brother and sister in for a quick visit. God bless our nurse who made that happen, even though it may not technically have been allowed. And made it through. And he's okay. He left the hospital after it was 6 days total. When he got out of the bed, he was like a baby deer. He was like a Bambi. He could barely step. He'd lost 5 pounds, which, he was only 68 pounds to start. And it wasn't until we walked out of the hospital and I hugged the nurse, Alyssa, that it finally hit me, right? It's like feeling it now. The amount of stress and the love that you have for your children and the fragility of these little bodies who totally depend on you and the enormous responsibility you have for their well-being, for making huge decisions, and the importance of family and friends, right? And good colleagues. I had Doug. I don't know what people who are single parenting do. God bless you. God bless you. It must be so hard, and I'm sure you have the feeling of loving your friends and your family even more. My 2 older, Yates and Yardley, were so delightful. They were so supportive of Thatcher, kept writing him notes. And when we got home, they had the place plastered with fun signs. We'll put them on the board on the YouTube. It's been so long since we've spleen you. Just cute moments that, brought all 5 of us together. And my son Yates gave Thatcher the greatest hug, which we caught on camera, which was just such a lovely moment, one I will never forget. And it left me feeling a couple of things when it was all done, between the RFK stuff, the hospital stuff. Early on in the show, we had somebody on, and it's a saying, I guess, but they said something to the effect of, the only thing that matters in life is within 15 feet of you, generally. Your family, your friends, your closest colleagues. And I made a decision a few years ago to make sure the things that were within 15 feet of me were the right things, meaning not Bill O'Reilly. And man, it was the right decision. It's been a rocky road. I'm not going to lie. Some of the path has been pretty rocky, but now it's pretty smooth and it's pretty glorious. And I have been able to raise my kids, to be with my friends a little bit more, at least, a lot more on the kids and the family, to nurture my marriage. And now I found a way to surround myself with amazing colleagues who I absolutely treasure and who are helping me bring the show to you. And in a way, I feel surrounded by you. I knew I was going to tell you this story. I knew that the people who understand who I am would find it interesting and would understand why I'm telling it to you. And that's a connection that's valuable to me as well. So thank you for being part of my 15 feet. And thank you to my colleagues on the show, colleagues at Sirius as well. And just a reminder to all of you that if you've got the wrong things there, it's not too late for you either to change what's within that grasp and to set yourself up for success. God forbid a tragedy should come your way. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.